What do you do when you drive out to surprise your own daughter and son-in-law, and the first person to greet you is their neighbor warning you not to ring the bell? Why would the police show up at a house you helped buy, acting like you're the problem? I thought I was just bringing a cake and some tools. Instead, I learned what my family really thought of me. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Robert Lawson, but most people just call me Rob. I turned 60 this year, and I thought I understood my life. I worked, I saved, I raised my daughter, and I tried to be a decent husband. I never expected that the worst humiliation of my life would start with a cake on the passenger seat, a box of tools in the trunk, and a quiet Saturday morning drive. 2 weeks before that day, my wife Helen had gone to visit our daughter Sarah and her husband Mark on her own. She came back on Sunday night with that careful tone she uses when she is trying not to upset me. She told me that Sarah needed some space, that my questions about their finances were making things tense. She said that maybe I should wait a bit before visiting, let things cool down. I told her I understood, even though I did not. Sarah is our only child. After everything we did to help her start her adult life, I did not see how a few questions about a mortgage could be such a problem. On that Saturday, Helen was working a long shift at the hospital. I woke up early, made coffee, and looked at the quiet house. It felt too still. The bed was empty on her side, the kitchen clean, no voices, no television. I took my mug to the table, and my eyes stayed on a framed picture of Sarah at 8 years old, grinning, missing teeth, holding a science fair ribbon. I remembered telling her that if she worked hard, she could build anything she wanted. For some reason, that memory made the empty house feel even bigger. I decided that maybe the whole situation had blown up in my head more than in real life. Helen has always been more sensitive than I am. I thought that maybe Sarah had just been stressed that weekend. People say things when they are tired or overwhelmed. I told myself that if I just showed up with something simple and kind, it might break the ice. No serious talks, no questions about budgets or debt, just a visit from her dad. So I took a cake from the freezer that Helen had baked last month and kept for a special occasion. I found the plastic container, wrapped it in a towel so it would not slide around in the car, and set it on the passenger seat. Then I grabbed my small toolbox from the garage. Mark had mentioned once in passing that the side gate at the house was sticking. I thought I could fix it in 20 minutes. That was one thing I was always good at, fixing small, annoying things. The drive to their neighborhood took about 40 minutes. It was one of those new suburban developments they build on the edge of town, with curved streets, clean sidewalks, and young trees tied to stakes. I had helped them get that house through a family trust, after the bank saw Mark's student debt and old credit problems and said no. I remember feeling proud when we signed the papers. I thought I was giving Sarah a future. The closer I got to their street, the more I tried to convince myself this was a normal visit. I rehearsed topics in my head. I told myself I would talk about the weather, Helen's shift, maybe the game I had watched last week. I would not mention money. I would not mention the trust. I would just be a dad bringing a cake. When I turned onto their cul-de-sac, I noticed something strange right away. It was quiet, but not the relaxed kind of quiet. People were out front, but they were standing still. A man across the street was pretending to check his mailbox, even though it was empty. A woman was leaning on her porch rail, looking in my direction, and then looking away quickly when I glanced at her. I parked on the street, a little past their driveway. My hands felt heavier than they should as I picked up the cake and closed the car door. The air was cool, with that faint smell of fresh-cut grass and car exhaust. I told myself I was overthinking it, that neighbors and cul-de-sacs just watched everyone because there was nothing better to do. As I stepped onto the sidewalk and started toward Sarah and Mark's house, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A woman from the house next door, small and dark-haired, hurried down her own driveway. She walked faster than you usually see someone walking on a calm Saturday morning. She raised her hand like she wanted me to stop. She reached me before I could turn up Sarah's walkway. She looked nervous, almost guilty. I remember her hands because she kept pressing her fingers together, like she did not know where to put them. She asked if I was Robert, Sarah's father. I said that I was. She introduced herself as Elena Torres, their neighbor. Then she told me that she thought I should not go up to the front door. Because she did not want me to be surprised by what would happen next, I asked her quietly what she meant. She said that Sarah and Mark had told the whole block that I was unstable and controlling. She said they had told the neighbors that I was not allowed on the property, that they had warned everyone that if I showed up, they should call the police because I might cause trouble. She said she did not believe that story, but others did. For a moment, the words did not land. I stood there with a cake in my hands, in a quiet, pretty street I had helped pay for, and tried to make sense of the idea that my daughter had told strangers I was some kind of danger. I asked Mrs. Torres how long this had been going on. She looked away and said that for a while there had been shouting at that house, especially at night. She said she had heard my name mentioned more than once in angry tones. She said Mark often told people that I had tried to control their lives with money, that I was obsessed with the house, that I would not let them forget who had paid for it. And she also said she had a camera on her front door, and it had caught a lot of this on video. As she spoke, I could feel the eyes of other neighbors on my back. A car drove slowly past and did not turn on any driveway. I suddenly became aware that my heart was beating too fast for such a quiet scene. I looked at Sarah's house. The blinds in the front window shifted, just a little, as if someone had moved them with 2 fingers and then dropped them again. Before I could decide whether to step forward or step back, I heard the low hum of a car behind me. Mrs. Torres turned her head, and the color drained from her face. I turned around and saw a police car coming up the street, its lights already on, swirling red and blue across the pale houses. The siren was off, which made it feel worse somehow. It felt like they wanted the show, not the noise. The patrol car stopped right in front of Sarah's driveway. 2 officers stepped out, 1 male, 1 female. The male officer, tall and solid, looked at me, then at Mrs. Torres, then at the house. He had that professional, careful expression that says he has done this 100 times and expects it to go wrong. Sarah's front door opened fast, almost like it had been waiting on a signal. Mark came out first, then Sarah behind him. Mark pointed in my direction and started talking loudly, making sure the officers and the neighbors could hear. He said that he had told them that I would not respect their boundaries. He said that he had explained that I always showed up without being invited, that I refused to understand that the house was theirs now. Sarah came down the steps with her arms folded around herself like she was cold. She told the officers that I would not accept that they needed distance. She said that I had turned up after she had clearly told me not to visit without permission. She said she was scared of how I might react if they did not let me in. Listening to my own child describe me as some kind of stalker was like hearing someone read out a story about a stranger. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I knew that if I spoke in that moment, my voice would shake. I also knew that shaking would only prove their point in the eyes of people who did not know me. The officers walked toward me. The male officer asked if I was Robert Lawson. I told him that I was. He asked if I understood that my daughter and her husband did not want me on their property. I said that I had not understood that before today. I told him that I had come with a cake and a toolbox, that I wanted to fix the side gate and see my daughter. My words sounded small even to me. The officer said that there had been prior calls, that there was already a record of tension. He said that for today he would ask me to leave, to avoid an escalation. He said he was not taking sides, but he needed to keep the peace. He asked if I could do that. Behind him, I heard Mark saying loudly to a group of neighbors that he had tried to handle this privately, that families were complicated, that sometimes you had to set hard boundaries with people who would not let go. I heard Sarah tell someone that she wished it had not come to this, but that she had to protect her household. I looked at my daughter when she said that. For a moment, our eyes met. I waited for even a flicker of recognition, a hint that she felt some shame. What I saw instead was a tight, scared face. I could not tell if she was scared of me or of losing the story she had built around me. I told the officer that I would leave. I said that I did not want to cause trouble. I apologized for any inconvenience. I felt like I was reciting lines from someone else's script, but they came out steady. He nodded and thanked me for cooperating, as if I was part of a routine procedure. I turned around and walked back to my car with the cake still in my hands. The plastic container felt heavier than a toolbox. My ears were hot. I could feel more eyes on me, feel phones pointed at my back. Someone whispered something I could not hear. I did not look around to find out who it was. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys twice before I managed to unlock the door. I set the cake back on the passenger seat and sat down slowly behind the wheel. My hands were trembling just enough to make the keys clink against each other when I let them drop into the cup holder. I stared through the windshield at the row of houses. Sarah and Mark were still on their front lawn, talking to the officers. Mrs. Torres stood on her driveway now, watching me with a worried expression. Across the street, the man at the mailbox finally closed it and went inside. The woman on the porch was still there, pretending to check a flower pot that did not need checking. I told myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Simple, calm. That was what people had always said about me, that I was calm, that I never lost my temper. In that moment, it felt less like a compliment and more like a cage, but I stayed inside it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from Helen, maybe asking how things were going. Instead, I saw a text from an unknown number. There was a photo attached, a still frame from a video. It showed me standing on the sidewalk, the police car in the background, Sarah and Mark on the steps. Underneath the picture, there was a short line of text. The sender said that the story I had just heard outside that house was not the whole truth, and that we both knew it. The sender asked me to call if I wanted to hear what had really been happening on that street. I looked up from the screen and saw Mrs. Torres standing by her own mailbox, phone in her hand, watching me carefully. I did not start the car right away. I kept looking from the text on my phone to Mrs. Torres standing by her mailbox. She gave me a small nod, as if to say that the message was from her. She did not wave, she did not smile, she just waited. I typed a short reply, asking if she was the one who had written. She answered almost at once and said that she was. She added that she did not feel right about what she had just seen. She wrote that if I wanted, we could talk later, away from the street and the staring neighbors. She suggested a cafe not far from the neighborhood. I sat there for a moment, phone in my hand, cake on the seat, police car still in my side mirror. I felt like I had been pushed out of my own family by strangers. At the same time, a stranger was now the only person offering me a small piece of solid ground. I told her I would meet her and asked when. She suggested the next day in the late morning. I agreed and then put the phone face down. The drive back home felt shorter than the drive there, even though I knew it was the same distance. My head was full, but my thoughts were not loud. It was like someone had turned the volume down in my brain. I noticed every small thing because I did not want to think about the big thing. I saw a dog sticking its head out of a car window at a red light. I saw someone washing their truck with a long hose. I smelled someone's barbecue starting in a backyard even though it was still morning. When I pulled into my own driveway, I stayed in the car for a few minutes again. It was becoming a habit. I looked at our small, older house with its peeling paint and worn porch steps. I thought about the shiny new house I had just left, the one I had helped them get. I thought about how one street saw me as a danger and how this street did not know anything about me at all. Inside, the house felt even emptier than when I had left it. I put the cake in the fridge, toolbox back in its place, keys on the hook. I walked from room to room without any clear reason. In the living room, I stood in front of another framed picture of Sarah, this time on her college graduation day. Mark was in that one too, standing behind her with a big grin, arms around her shoulders. I remembered that day better than almost any other. On that graduation day, Sarah had introduced Mark as her boyfriend. He had been charming, loud, and friendly. He had called me Sir a lot and talked about how grateful he was that Sarah had such a supportive father. He had told me he loved how close our family seemed. He had said that he did not have that growing up and he wanted it. Back then, I believed him. The next morning, I woke up before Helen got home from her night shift. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I took out a notepad and wrote a few simple lines. I wrote that I had tried to visit Sarah and Mark, that the police had been called, that I had agreed to leave. I wrote that a neighbor had reached out. I did it this way because I knew that when I told Helen, she might think I was exaggerating unless I had it clear in front of me. Writing the facts helped me calm down. When Helen came in, she looked tired but cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my Saturday had gone. I told her, calmly, what had happened. I told her about Mrs. Torres, about the police, about Sarah's words, and about the meeting at the cafe later. Helen listened with her mouth slightly open. At first, she said she was sure there had been a misunderstanding. She said that maybe someone else had called the police, or that Sarah had been pushed into saying things by Mark. Then she asked if I had maybe sounded angry on the phone before, or sent any messages that could have been taken the wrong way. It was a small question, but I felt it like a knife. I told her that I had not. She studied my face for a moment, then sat down next to me. She put her hand on my arm and said that I should at least hear what the neighbor had to say, that it might help us understand. At the cafe, Mrs. Torres greeted me at a back table. She looked different in daylight, without the tension of the street. She said that she had lived next to Sarah and Mark since they moved in. She said that at first she had thought they were a nice young couple. She told me that they had talked about how grateful they were for my help, that they had mentioned that I had made the house possible. Then she said that over time, the way they talked about me had changed. She said that she had heard my name in arguments through the walls and across the yards. She said that Mark often complained that I tried to tell them what to do, that I did not respect that it was their house. She said that Sarah had started telling people I was strict, old-fashioned, and controlling. She said that they acted like I used money to control them. She looked me in the eye and told me that she did not believe all of that. She said that she had been a school principal for many years, that she knew what controlling behavior looked like. She said that what she had seen instead was a young couple who enjoyed spending money and did not like being reminded where it came from. She told me that she had installed a doorbell camera for safety. She said it had picked up more than she expected. She told me that on some nights, the camera had recorded Mark bragging to friends that he had gotten an older man to pay for his house. She said he would complain that I still acted like it was mine, and then he would joke that I had signed everything in a trust and could not do anything now. She said that Sarah had laughed along. She told me that she had copied some of that footage, including the police visit, onto a drive. She said that she thought it might matter later if things escalated. She spoke slowly and carefully, like someone who knew the weight of her words. She added that she did not want to be in the middle of family problems, but she did not like lies, and she did not like seeing someone treated unfairly. Listening to her, I felt two things at the same time. One part of me felt sick, because this meant that what happened on the driveway was not a sudden outburst. It was part of a pattern. Another part of me felt something I had not felt in a long time, the firm ground of facts under my feet. The truth was, this did not start on that driveway. It started years before, in attorney Alan Park's office, when Sarah and Mark could not get a mortgage on their own. I remember that meeting clearly. Sarah sat next to Mark, holding his hand. She looked excited and a little nervous. Mark wore a new shirt and kept talking about how this house would be their fresh start. Alan went through the loan options, the bank's refusal, and then the idea of a family trust that would buy the property and give them the right to live there. Alan talked about conditions, about protections, about what would happen if certain lines were crossed. I remember him saying that emotions change, but documents stay. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Sarah's face. I just wanted her to have a safe place to live. When Alan suggested including terms that would let the trust take back control if there was serious disrespect or harm, I said he should do whatever he thought was wise. I did not focus on the details. That was my mistake, and also my quiet strength later. Back at home after the cafe, I sat in the kitchen with Helen and told her what Mrs. Torres had said. Helen listened, rubbing her forehead. She said that Sarah had never spoken that harshly about me to her. She said that when she visited, Sarah mostly complained that I was too intense about money, that I brought up interest rates and budgets at family dinners. Helen admitted that she had sometimes told Sarah that I was just worried and that she should humor me. I could see that she was starting to understand that the problem was bigger than she had thought. Still, she asked if I had said anything in anger in the past that might have pushed Sarah away. She reminded me of a night a year earlier when there had been a bad argument. I remembered that night all too well. It had been in our living room. Sarah and Mark had come over. We had eaten dinner, and then I had asked about their credit card debt again. I had seen a bill on the counter during a visit. Mark had laughed and brushed it off. He had said that everyone had debt. I had pointed out that not everyone also had a house paid mainly by someone else. The conversation had turned sharp. Mark had accused me of trying to own them. He had said that I did not understand that it was their life. Sarah had said that sometimes it felt like the house had strings attached to it. I had said, in a low voice, that if they could not respect the help they had received, maybe they should try doing it all without my name on anything. It was not a threat. It was a tired man's frustration. But I could see how a person who wanted to twist it could turn that moment into a story where I was the villain. They could say that I had threatened to throw them out. They could say that I held the house over their heads. After that night, Helen had urged me to let it go. She had said that they were young and would settle down. I had agreed and tried to step back. I stopped asking about bills. I stopped mentioning the trust. I thought that by being quiet, I was helping. In reality, my silence gave them room to rewrite the story of who I was. That evening, after the meeting with Mrs. Torres, I sat in my home office. It is a small room with an old desk, some shelves, and a filing cabinet. There are pictures of bridges and buildings on the walls from projects I worked on as an engineer. I opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet where I keep important documents. I pulled out the thick folder with Sarah's name written neatly on the tab. Inside were copies of the trust papers, the original purchase agreement, notes from meetings with Alan, and some old emails printed out. Tucked into the front was a yellow sticky note in Alan's handwriting. It just had 2 words on it. Conditions agreed. I had forgotten that note even existed. Seeing it made my chest feel tight and clear at the same time. I did not read everything that night. I just spread the papers out on the desk and looked at them. I ran my fingers along the edges of the pages. These were not feelings. These were facts. They were not perfect shields, but they were something solid in a situation that suddenly felt very loose. Later, when I was too tired to keep reading, I put the papers back into the folder and set it on the desk instead of in the drawer. I wanted to see it when I woke up. I wanted to remind myself that I was not crazy, that there was a real history behind all this. Before I went to bed, I checked my phone one more time. The family group chat was quiet. There were old photos and jokes if I scrolled up far enough, back to birthdays and holidays. Pictures of Sarah blowing out candles, Mark flipping burgers at the grill in our backyard, Helen laughing with flour on her nose. It hurt to look at them, but I did it anyway. I fell asleep thinking about bridges. When you design a bridge, you assume certain loads, certain forces. You design so that the structure can take more than it should ever have to. You do not expect the biggest load to come from the people you built it for. The next afternoon, the group chat lit up. Sarah posted a long message. She wrote that after yesterday's incident, she wanted to make sure everyone in the family understood. She said that for her own peace and for Mark's mental health, I was not to visit their house without a clear, written invitation from them. She said that any unannounced visits would be treated as boundary violations. I read it twice, slowly. Then I put the phone down on the table, next to the folder with the trust papers, and just sat there in silence. The message from Sarah sat there in the group chat like a brick on my screen. I read it again. Simple lines, polite words, cold meaning. She wrote that after what had happened, she needed clear boundaries. She wrote that for her peace and for Mark's mental health, I was not to visit their house without a written invitation. She wrote that any surprise visit would be treated as a violation. A few family members reacted with neutral emojis. Helen stayed silent. I did too. There was nothing I could say in that chat that would not be twisted. They had already painted the picture they wanted. Anything I added would just be another color in their version. I set the phone down and looked at the folder on my desk, the one with Sarah's name on it. I realized sitting there that I had been living in two different worlds. In one world, I was the person I knew, a father who had worked hard, signed papers, helped his child. In the other world, the one Sarah and Mark had built with their words, I was a problem to be managed, a threat to be pushed away. I understood something very clearly in that moment. Those two worlds could not keep existing side by side. One of them would win, and the one that won would be the one backed by evidence, not by feelings. I am not a man who has loud explosions. I do not shout, throw things, or slam doors. When something finally breaks inside me, it does not look dramatic. It is quiet. That day, the break was a simple thought. I will not argue anymore. I will not beg people to remember who I am. I will go to the places that write things down. The next morning, I drove to the police station. It is not a big building. Brick, glass doors, a flag out front. I stood in the parking lot for a moment before going in, feeling strangely like a child about to enter the principal's office. I had never been in trouble with the law. I had barely had a parking ticket in my life. Now I was walking into a police station because my daughter had called the police on me. Inside, the lobby was clean and quiet. A woman sat behind a glass window typing. A few chairs lined the wall. A poster about community safety hung crooked near the door. I went to the window and waited until the woman noticed me. I told her my name and said that I wanted a copy of an incident report from a call the previous day in a certain neighborhood. I gave her the address. I said I believed I was the subject of the call and that I wanted to see what had been written. My voice sounded flat but steady. She asked me to wait. After a few minutes, a man in uniform came out. He introduced himself as Officer Daniels. He looked like one of the officers from the driveway, though I was not sure. It had all been a blur. He looked at me with a cautious, assessing expression, then asked me to sit down. We sat in the lobby chairs. He had a tablet with him. He asked me to confirm my full name, date of birth, and relationship to the people at that address. I answered. Then he explained that I was allowed to request the public part of the report. He said he could print it for me. He went back behind the door. I watched other people come and go. A young man came in to report a stolen bike. A woman brought a child who had lost a backpack at the park. They all seemed to belong there more than I did. I sat with my hands folded and counted my breaths. Officer Daniels came back with a few sheets of paper. He handed them to me and sat down again. He said that if I had any questions about what was written there, he could answer within limits. I looked at the report. It was simple. Date, time, address, names. Then there was a description of the call. It said that the residents had reported an older male family member who would not respect boundaries, who had repeatedly arrived without permission, who had previously made statements about the house and his right to be there. It said that the residents felt emotionally unsafe around me, that they were worried about my reaction to their requests for space. It said that the officers had arrived to find me on the sidewalk, that I had cooperated and left when asked. Reading about myself in that cold, official language did something to me. It took the story I had in my head and stripped it down to their version. There was nothing about the cake, the tools, the years of support. There was nothing about the trust. There were only their words and my obedience. I asked Officer Daniels if the report said I had done anything illegal. He said no. He said the call was about a disturbance and a family conflict, not a crime. He said I had not broken any law that day. He also said that if calls like that continued, the pattern could start to matter. I thanked him and folded the papers carefully. He watched me for a moment and then said that sometimes family disputes get written in strange ways. He said he had seen parents and children switch roles in reports more than once. He did not say more, but his eyes were kind. On the way back to my car, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like an engineer again. I had a set of documents in my hand. They showed how the other side had chosen to describe me officially. Now that description was part of a system, systems can be measured, compared, tested. I drove home without turning on the radio. When I arrived, I went straight to my home office. I put the police report on the desk next to the trust folder. I looked at the two piles of paper sitting side by side. On one side, the years of support and planning. On the other, the new story being told about me. I sat down in my chair and leaned back. I stared at the ceiling for a while. Then I leaned forward again and reached for my phone. I called Mrs. Torres. She answered quickly. I thanked her again for meeting me at the cafe and for telling me the truth about what she had seen. I told her I had just picked up the police report. I said it felt strange to see myself described that way. She said softly that it did not match the man she had met. She said that she had watched enough students and parents over the years to know when someone was acting out of fear and when someone was acting out of pride. She said that what she had heard from Sarah and Mark sounded more like pride. She told me again about the camera on her door. She said it had recorded the driveway scene with sound. She said it had also picked up parts of some late-night arguments in their yard, where my name was thrown around like a curse and a joke at the same time. She said she had downloaded those clips in case they were needed. I did not ask for the footage that day. I only asked her if she would be willing to confirm what she knew if someone official ever asked. She said that she would, as long as she did not have to pick a side in a shouting match. I promised her that if it came to anything, there would be no shouting from me. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand. I knew what the next call had to be. I had known attorney Alan Park for many years. He had helped me with simple things at first. A will, some small investments, a review of an insurance policy. When Sarah and Mark could not get a mortgage, he had been the one to suggest the trust. I found his number and pressed the screen. He answered after a few rings, his voice calm and familiar. He asked how I was. I told him, as simply as I could, what had happened on the driveway. I told him about the police, about Sarah's message in the group chat, about Mrs. Torres and her camera. I kept my voice level. I did not add any extra anger to the story. I just laid out the facts. For a moment after I finished, there was silence on his end. Then his tone shifted. It was still calm, but more focused. He said that he remembered the trust we had set up for Sarah's house. He said that he also remembered the conversation we had about protective conditions. He reminded me that he had warned me back then that the biggest fights are often not about money itself, but about what money represents. He asked if I still had my copy of the trust documents. I said that I did, and that they were on my desk. He asked if I had read them recently. I admitted that I had not in detail. He did not scold me. He just said that it was time for both of us to read them carefully. He suggested that I come to his office later that week. He said we would go through the trust line by line. He said we would look at what Sarah and Mark had done and said, and we would see if those actions matched any of the triggers we had included. He spoke about conditions and remedies and occupancy rights in that precise way that good lawyers do. He also reminded me of something he had told me years ago. He said that the trust was not just a gift, it was also a tool. It had been built not only to protect Sarah, but to protect me and my intentions. If those intentions were being twisted, then the tool was meant to respond. I listened, and for the first time in days, I felt like I was not standing alone in the middle of an empty room. I had someone else in the room now, someone who understood both feelings and papers. We agreed on a day and time. Before we ended the call, he asked me one more question. He asked if I was ready for the idea that any action we took might damage my relationship with Sarah beyond repair. He said he had to ask, because once certain steps were taken, there would be no going back. I did not answer right away. I looked at the graduation picture of Sarah on the wall. I looked at the police report on the desk. I looked at the folder with the trust papers. Then I said that Sarah had already done most of the damage herself. I said that I was not looking for revenge. I was looking for balance. Alan said that was the right word. Then we ended the call. I set the phone down. My office suddenly felt smaller, but in a way that was comforting, like walls closing in, not to trap me, but to hold me up. I turned on my computer. As it started, I saw the familiar background image of a bridge I had helped design. Strong lines, clean cables, everything balanced. My email program loaded. A small red dot appeared in the corner of the screen, showing new messages. One message was from a name I did not recognize. It was from a homeowners association in Sarah's neighborhood. The subject line said, "Emergency session, property concerns, Lot 14." Lot 14 was Sarah and Mark's house. I clicked the email. It was a formal notice about a meeting scheduled for the following week at the community clubhouse. The message said that there had been repeated calls to the police from that address and questions about who was responsible for certain issues. It listed the occupants and the legal owner of the lot. Under legal owner, it said, Lawson Family Trust, represented by Robert Lawson. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a line saying that legal counsel for the owner was welcome to attend. I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath. The system that Sarah and Mark had tried to use against me was now asking me to step into the room. The email from the Homeowners Association stayed open on my screen for a long time. I reread the subject line several times. Emergency session, property concerns, lot 14. My name underneath, listed as the representative of the legal owner. For months, maybe years, I had been treated like a ghost around that house. Now, on this small patch of digital space, I suddenly existed again in an official way. Not as the problem, not as the controlling father, but as the owner. I printed the email and laid it next to the police report and the trust folder on my desk. 3 small piles of paper, 3 different angles on the same story. When the day came to meet with Attorney Park, I arrived early. His office building was the same as always. Glass doors, beige lobby, a faint smell of coffee and old carpet. I rode the elevator up and sat in the waiting area. There were a few other people there, talking quietly or staring at their phones. No one looked like they were in a good mood. People do not come to a lawyer when life is simple. Alan came out to greet me himself. He was in his early 60s, gray hair, clear eyes, a steady way of moving. He shook my hand and led me into his office. The room had shelves full of thick books and neat binders. A window looked out over a parking lot and some trees. On his desk was a file already open with my name on the tab. We sat down, and he did not waste time. He asked me to tell him again, in order, what had happened. The visit, the neighbor, the police, the messages, the cafe, the police report, the HOA email. He made small notes as I spoke, asking short questions to clarify dates and names. When I finished, he took a breath and opened the file on his desk. Inside were copies of the trust documents we had created years before. He also took the folder I handed him, the one I had pulled from my drawer at home, and laid it beside his. He started at the beginning. He reminded me why we had created the trust in the first place. The bank's refusal, Mark's debts, my wish to help Sarah without putting everything in her name directly. Then he reminded me of the conversation we had back then about protections. He used the same term he had used before, conditions. He did not read every line out loud. Instead, he pointed to certain paragraphs and summarized. There were parts about what would happen if Sarah and Mark stopped paying property taxes, parts about what would happen if they tried to sell or refinance without the trust's consent. And then there was a section he tapped twice with his pen before looking at me. He said that this section was the one he had wanted me to pay attention to years ago. It dealt with behavior, not money. It said that the grantors, meaning me and Helen, were to be treated as family and as benefactors in connection with the property. It said that if the occupants publicly disavowed us, or denied our role in providing the house, or created a situation where we were framed as threats in relation to that property, the trust could revoke their right to live there. I looked at the lines he showed me. I could not remember the exact words from the day we signed them, but I trusted that they were what he said. My own signature was at the bottom of the document, and that was enough. Alan asked me if Sarah and Mark had ever, in private, said that they wished they had gotten the house without my help. I said yes. He asked if they had ever told others that the house was theirs and that my role was nothing. I said yes. Then he asked if they had ever treated me as some kind of danger in front of others in connection with that property. I thought of the police car, the neighbors, the words emotionally unsafe on the report, the group chat message forbidding me from visiting. I said yes. He nodded slowly and leaned back in his chair. He said that, on paper, we had a case that they had triggered those conditions, but he also said that, on paper, was not enough. We would need proof of what they had said and done, in their own words, in front of others. I told him about Mrs. Torres and her doorbell camera. I told him what she had heard and seen, and how she had offered to share it. I told him about the video she said she had of the driveway scene, with sound. Alan's expression sharpened. He said that video and audio would be very important, not just for the trust, but also for any interaction with the HOA, and, if needed, a court. He asked if I could get a copy of what she had. I said I could ask. He said I should do so, politely, and tell her it might help clear up confusion with the association. We also talked about the HOA email. He said that the fact they had invited the legal owner meant they were already aware that Sarah and Mark were not the only parties that mattered. He said that sometimes rules and paperwork seem boring until a situation like this shows up. Then those lines become sharp tools. Before I left, Alan asked me one more time if I understood what it might mean to use those tools. He said that if we moved forward, Sarah and Mark could lose their right to live in the house. He said that it might also push them to say worse things about me. I told him I understood. I also told him that they had already said worse things than I ever imagined. He did not argue. On my way out of the building, I felt strangely lighter. I did not have a plan yet. Not fully, but I had a map. I knew where the walls were. That evening, I walked across our backyard in the dark. Helen was inside watching television. The grass felt cool under my shoes. I looked up at the small patch of sky visible between the roofs of nearby houses. I remembered walking behind Sarah when she was little, holding the back of her bike seat, promising not to let go until she was ready. I wondered when she had decided that I was not holding her up, but holding her back. The next day, I called Mrs. Torres again. I asked if I could stop by her house briefly. She agreed. When I arrived, she met me at her front door. Her house was neat, with potted plants along the steps and wind chimes hanging from the eaves. She invited me in, but I said we could talk just inside the hallway. I explained that I had met with my lawyer. I told her that there were written conditions about how Sarah and Mark were supposed to treat me in connection with the house, and that their behavior might have broken those terms. I did not go into legal detail. I just said that having an accurate record of what had happened on that street could help the association and anyone else involved understand the truth. She listened carefully, then went to a small table where a laptop sat. She opened it and clicked through a few folders. After a minute, she plugged a small USB drive into the side and copied some files. When she was done, she took the drive out and handed it to me. She said that on that drive were copies of the driveway incident and a few earlier clips. She said they included times when Mark complained about me, using my full name, and bragged about how he had gotten me to pay. She said there was at least one clip where Sarah laughed about not letting me inside ever again. She said there were also moments where they referred to me as no one in relation to the house. She looked uncomfortable, not because of me, but because of what she had seen. She said that she did not like handing over evidence against a neighbor. She also said that she would not lie if anyone asked her what she had seen. She said she believed that respect mattered more than comfort. I thanked her and told her that I would do my best to handle things calmly. I promised not to drag her into any shouting match or revenge scheme. She nodded, then surprised me by placing a hand briefly on my arm and saying that parents deserve basic respect, especially when they have given so much. I left her house with a small drive in my pocket. It weighed almost nothing, yet it felt heavy in my hand. I sat in my car for a moment outside the subdivision, holding the drive between my fingers. I thought about what was inside, their words, their laughter, their version of me. It would be easy to focus only on the insult in those clips. Instead, I tried to focus on something else. Proof. Proof that I was not imagining this. Proof that this was not just a misunderstanding. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station, bought a cheap envelope, and labeled it with the date and Torres footage. When I got back to my office, I put the drive into my computer, briefly checked that the files were there and played, then took it out and put it into the envelope. I wrote a simple note to Alan, saying that this was the footage we had discussed, and put the envelope into my bag for our next meeting. A day later, Alan told me he had spoken with the HOA president, Denise Miller. He said she had been very interested to learn that I, not Sarah and Mark, was the legal owner of the property. He said that from her point of view, the trust was the member of the association, and that repeated calls to the police from occupants without the owner's involvement raised questions about liability. He also said that Denise wanted to make sure the HOA handled everything by the book. She did not want to be accused of taking sides in a family dispute, but she also did not want the association to be pulled into a pattern of false or exaggerated reports. The emergency session, he explained, would be her way of putting everything on the table in a structured way. As the date of the meeting came closer, Sarah and Mark's online behavior changed. For a few days, there were no posts in the family group chat. Then, suddenly, Sarah started sharing photos again, pictures of their backyard dinners, Mark at the grill, her smiling with a glass in hand, captions about loving our own space, and creating our own peace. I noticed something in those photos that probably no one else did. When the camera angle caught the side of the house, I saw people in the background. Neighbors, laughing, talking, raising drinks. I recognized some of them from that morning. The man by the mailbox, the woman on the porch, the people who had watched me walk back to my car. Around the same time, Mrs. Torres mentioned that things on the street had gone quiet for a bit. No late-night shouting, no loud complaints about me. She said that Mark seemed relaxed again, walking around like the king of the cul-de-sac, laughing loud, telling stories. She thought maybe he believed the police visit had solved everything. One evening, on a feeling I could not quite explain, I drove back to their neighborhood and parked near the entrance, not on their street. I sat in my car as the sun went down, watching people walk dogs and children ride bikes. I could see the top of their house over the other roofs. At one point, I got out and walked a little closer, staying on the main road. From a distance, I could see into their backyard. There was a small gathering, a grill going, strings of lights, people sitting in lawn chairs. Mark was standing near the grill, talking with his hands, making people laugh. Sarah sat in a chair, phone in hand, smiling when someone showed her something on the screen. I could not hear what they were saying, but I did not need to. I had heard enough secondhand. Watching them there, relaxed and comfortable, pretending everything was fine, I realized something important. They thought the story was settled. In their minds, they had drawn the lines. They had set boundaries with me. The police had backed them up. The neighbors had seen. They did not know about the trust details. They did not know about the footage in an envelope in my lawyer's office. They did not know that the HOA saw me as the owner. They did not know about the emergency session. They believed I was out of the picture. On the way back to my car, I passed the community notice board near the subdivision entrance. There, among flyers for babysitting and yard sales, was a printed sheet from the HOA. It listed the date and time of the emergency session and said that attendance was required for the occupants of Lot 14 and requested for the owner. Seeing my lot number on that board in public felt like a small preview of what was coming. When I got home, Helen was in the kitchen. She asked where I had been, and I told her I had gone for a drive and ended up near Sarah's neighborhood. She looked at me for a long moment and then asked if I was planning to go to the HOA meeting. I said yes. She bit her lip and asked what I and Alan planned to do. I told her that we were going to let the documents and the facts speak. I said we would not shout or accuse. We would only point to what had already been written and recorded. She asked very quietly if this meant Sarah and Mark might lose the house. I did not answer right away. Then I said that the house had never truly been theirs. It had always been held for them, on terms. They had just acted like those terms did not exist. Now they would have to see them. Helen looked hurt, but she did not argue. She said that she did not want to lose her daughter. I told her that I did not want to lose mine either. But I added that our daughter had already chosen to lose me, at least in public. All I was doing now was refusing to disappear on her schedule. Later that night, alone in my office, I opened my calendar app. The date of the HOA session was marked in bold. I added a simple note to it. Bring folder. Bring calm. The folder was ready. The calm I would have to build, one quiet breath at a time, until I walked into that room. The week before, the HOA meeting passed in a strange slow motion. On the surface, everything looked normal. I mowed the lawn, paid bills, cooked dinner when Helen worked late. The sun rose and set on schedule. Underneath that, something heavy was shifting. I tried not to obsess over what might happen. Instead, I did small, practical tasks. I checked that I had clean copies of the trust documents. I printed the HOA email and put it in a clear sleeve. I stapled the police report neatly. I wrote a short list of what each document showed, in my own words, on a yellow notepad. I did not plan a speech. I only planned the order in which facts might need to appear. One afternoon, Alan called. His voice had the same steady tone, but I could hear a slight edge of focus. He said that before the HOA meeting, there was one more thing he wanted me to do. He explained that we could strengthen our position by confirming some instructions at the bank where the trust was held. We had already built the tools into the trust, but he wanted to make sure that if we decided to use them, there would be no delay, no confusion, no room for anyone to claim they did not understand. He asked if I could meet him at the bank on Thursday. When I arrived at the bank, the air inside was cool and smelled faintly like printer ink and perfume. People stood in line, filling out forms, tapping at their phones. Alan was already there, seated in a small side office with a woman from the trust department. She wore a blazer and had a polite, careful smile. We went over the basics first, the name of the Lawson family trust, the property it owned, the current occupants. The woman scrolled through files on her screen. Alan asked her to pull up certain instructions and confirm that they were still in place, that the trust could revoke occupancy rights if certain conditions were met, that the trustee would follow written directions from me about what to do next with the property, that notices to occupants would be handled a specific way. He did not say out loud that these were being triggered. He just made sure the pathways were clear. Then he slid a small stack of papers in front of me. They were updates and clarifications, reaffirming who had authority to direct the trust, stating what would happen if occupancy ended, confirming timelines and communication channels with the HOA. He did not rush me. He let me read each line. I read slowly. The words were dry, but they carried weight. They did not say Sarah or Mark. They said occupants and beneficiaries and grantor. It was easier that way. It felt less like throwing my child out and more like adjusting a structure that had bent too far in one direction. When I finished reading, I signed each page. The pen felt solid in my hand. The trust officer stamped the documents with a heavy, satisfying click. The sound reminded me of a steel beam locking into place. As we left the bank, Alan asked how I was feeling. I told him the truth, that I felt like I had just bolted down the last loose board on a bridge before a storm. He said that was exactly what we were doing. Then he reminded me again that nothing would happen automatically. The HOA meeting was still a place for facts and discussion, but if certain facts were confirmed there, the trust was now fully ready to act. That night, Helen and I sat at the kitchen table facing each other. She had a cup of tea, I had a glass of water. The silence between us was heavier than either drink. She asked what I had done at the bank. I told her in simple terms. We had checked the trust, confirmed some instructions, signed some documents to make sure there were no gaps. I did not use legal words. I told her that if the conditions in the trust were truly met, the trust could end Sarah and Mark's right to live in the house. I told her that if that happened, the trust would decide what to do with the property next. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. She asked if I was sure this was the only way. I said I did not know if it was the only way, but I believed it was the right way. I told her that I had tried talking, I had tried stepping back, I had tried being quiet. All of that had only made it easier for them to push me further out and rewrite the story. I said something then that surprised even me. I told her that this was not just about a house, it was about whether I was allowed to exist in my own life. If they could use my work and my name and then erase me when it suited them, then I had no self-respect left. I was not ready to give that up, even for peace. Helen looked at me for a long time. Then she said quietly that she would go to the HOA meeting if she was allowed to sit near the back. She said she was afraid of what she might hear, but more afraid of not knowing. I nodded. The day before the meeting, I sent a short text to Sarah. I kept it as neutral as I could. I wrote that I had received the notice about the emergency HOA session. I wrote that I would be attending as the legal owner of the property. I added that I hoped we could handle things respectfully and that no one would raise their voice. I stared at the message for a moment, then pressed send. The reply did not come from Sarah first. It came from Mark, in a separate text. He wrote that he knew I was trying something with paperwork because I couldn't control them anymore. He said they weren't afraid of my old contracts. He called the meeting a waste of time and said they had the police and the neighbors on their side. A few minutes later, Sarah posted in the family group chat. She wrote that there would be an HOA thing about some paperwork confusion and that everything was fine. She said she wished people would just respect boundaries so it didn't have to get messy. She did not name me directly, but everyone could see who she meant. Some relatives reacted with thumbs-up emojis and comments like, "Hope it goes smoothly." No one asked for my version. I did not reply to any of it. I took screenshots of Mark's message and Sarah's post and printed them. I added them to the folder on my desk. The folder was getting thicker, not from my opinions, but from their words. The morning of the meeting, I woke before dawn. For a while I just lay there, listening to Helen's breathing next to me, staring at the faint light on the ceiling. Part of me wanted to stay in bed, to pretend nothing was happening. Another part was already standing in that clubhouse, hearing chairs scrape and people clear their throats. I got up, showered, shaved. I put on a plain button-up shirt and dark pants. Not a suit, but not casual either. I wanted to look like what I was, a serious man, not a performer. I ate a small breakfast, even though I had no appetite. I knew I would need the energy. In my home office, I opened the folder one last time. Inside were copies of the trust summary Alan had prepared, the bank confirmations we had just signed, the HOA email and printed notice, the police report from the driveway incident, screenshots of the group chat messages and Mark's text, a short written statement from Mrs. Torres, in her own words, saying she was willing to confirm what she had seen and recorded if asked. Beside the folder was a small USB drive in a labeled plastic bag containing the camera footage. Alan would handle that part. My job was simpler: show up, stay calm, listen, and speak only when needed. Before we left the house, Helen put her hand on my arm. She looked scared in a way I had never seen. She asked me for one promise. She asked me to keep my voice level, no matter what was said. She said that if our daughter was going to fall, she did not want me to be the one pushing. She wanted the truth and the consequences to do that work. I told her I would not shout. I told her I did not need to. The documents and videos had louder voices than I did. We drove to the HOA clubhouse together, but in separate cars. She said she wanted the option to leave early if it became too much. I understood. The clubhouse was a low, wide building near the entrance of the neighborhood, with big windows and a simple sign. Outside, a few cars were already parked: sedans, SUVs, and one police cruiser. Seeing the police car made my stomach tighten, but then I saw who was leaning against it. Officer Daniels. He was talking quietly with another officer. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. Not friendly, not cold. Just professional. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. The air conditioning clicked off. The car fell silent. I took one slow breath, then another. I picked up the folder and the small bag with the USB drive, checked that they were secure, and opened the door. The air outside was warmer than I expected. I could hear the distant hum of traffic and the closer murmur of voices inside the clubhouse. Helen's car pulled in a minute later. She got out and walked toward the entrance without looking at me, but when she reached the door, she paused and waited until I caught up. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like coffee and cleaning spray. There were rows of folding chairs set up facing a long table at the front. At that table sat Denise Miller, the HOA president, with a stack of papers and a laptop open in front of her. Next to her was another HOA board member. At the end of the table sat Alan, already in place, calm and composed. Neighbors filled many of the chairs. I recognized faces from the street, the man with the mailbox, the woman from the porch, a few others who had watched me leave that day with the cake. Mrs. Torres was there too, sitting near the middle, hands folded over her bag. She gave me a small, steady nod. Sarah and Mark were on the right side of the room, side by side. Mark had his arms crossed and a bored look on his face, as if this were an annoying delay before something more important. Sarah's eyes were red around the edges, but her jaw was set. I walked down the aisle between the chairs, feeling every eye on me. I could hear the faint buzz of someone's phone vibrating on a chair, the shuffle of feet as people adjusted their positions. I saw one or two phones held low, screens facing up, already recording. Alan stood briefly as I reached the front, then sat again. He pulled out the chair next to him at the table. I took my seat, placed the folder in front of me, and folded my hands on top of it. Denise looked around the room. She checked a list on her clipboard, then she cleared her throat, the sound sharp in the quiet space, and said that the emergency session would begin as soon as the legal owner of Lot 14 was seated. Denise opened the meeting, introduced me as the legal owner, and handed the floor to Alan. He read the trust clause, played Mrs. Torres's videos, and slid fresh notices to Sarah and Mark. When Denise demanded the keys, Mark surrendered them. I stood, thanked everyone, and walked out in silence.